Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
New vehicles are great, but if we don't have cops to fill them, therefore not.
The mayor's budget proposal is up for a vote on Monday. Heather Sharon breaks down the biggest sticking points.
Our families don't often have time to heal before the next incident occurs.
Anti-violence efforts in East Garfield Park as the community works to heal from Monday's mass shooting. We have a live report.
The once mighty Mississippi River is facing near record lows. How that impacts Illinois farmers and the country's supply chain.
There's a lot of things that we want to do, there are plans to do that we really wouldn't be able to do without additional resources.
Cook County Forest Preserves asks voters for a tax hike.
It's that time again, time to turn back our clocks. A look at the effect that daylight savings time has had on sleep patterns and a push to make it permanent.
Historical works of art show how artists embraced new definitions of sexuality, gender, and romance.
He always said that his photographs and fragments were no substitute for the building itself.
And we introduce you to the preservationist behind the lens, Richard Nickel, in an exhibit at the Treehouse Museum.
And Brandis and Paris, as you mentioned, I'll be reporting live tonight from East Garfield Park, the latest in our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Now, 14 people, 3 of whom were kids, were wounded in a drive-by shooting Monday night. CPD this afternoon had no updates on their investigation. Residents and advocates say that such trauma takes a toll, but they say they're not giving up hope. We'll have more on that story in just a bit, but first, sending it back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now to some of today's top stories. The Chicago Police Department is not using its budget effectively or equitably to reduce violence in the city. That's according to the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability that reviewed CPD's 2023 budget. The commission is legally required to review the police budget each year before City Council votes on it and says the department, quote, does not currently have a long-term, data-driven strategy to reduce violence. In a statement, police department leaders say they appreciate the commission's input, quote, listening to and having open discussions with the residents we serve is essential to public safety.
A Chicago alderperson is demanding a Republican ad be taken down. The ad is the latest from Republican operative Dan Prof's Political Action Committee, and it uses audio of Pritzker appearing to disparage the qualifications of black politicians. The audio came from an FBI wiretap of then-Governor Rod Blagojevich in 2008. It was first made public in 2018. At the end of the ad is a clip of 9th Ward Alderman Anthony Beal seemingly criticizing Pritzker for taking the black community for granted. But in a statement, Beal says Prof has taken his words out of context in a, quote, attempt to diminish the vote for Governor Pritzker. Beal adds, quote, Darren Bailey, Dan Prof, and their racist fear-mongering propaganda machine have never once stood up for black and brown families, and their attempts to use us as political pawns in the final days of this election is sickening.
It's official. The Chicago White Sox have a new manager. In a statement posted on Twitter this morning, the Sox announced Pedro Grifol has agreed to terms on a multi-year contract. The 52-year-old Grifol joins the Sox from the Kansas City Royals, where for the last 3 years he's been bench coach. Sox GM Rick Hahn praises Grifol, saying he's a, quote, bilingual modern baseball thinker who brings 2+ decades of experience in a variety of roles.
Interesting news on the south side. And coming up in the program, the Mississippi River and its near record lows. And a look at how that affects Illinois farmers.
But first, how is the East Garfield Park community healing following the mass shooting on Halloween? That and more from our In Your Neighborhood series right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago police have no updates on Monday's mass shooting in East Garfield Park. Correspondent Amanda Vinicky and producer Acacia Hernandez spent time in the community on the city's west side for this week's edition of In Your Neighborhood. Amanda joins us now from the Garfield Park Fieldhouse. Amanda.
The field house, Brandis, is better known as the Golden Dome building for obvious reasons. This structure was built in 1928. That's before the community here saw a precipitous drop in population. At about 20,000 residents now, it's easily a third of what it was at the time. Some in Chicago may better associate East Garfield Park with violence than they do the Golden Dome. According to an analysis by the Chicago Sun-Times, East Garfield Park had 14 homicides and 80 non-fatal shootings through October 28th. That does not include Halloween's mass shooting, which is believed to be the largest instance of gun violence this year. 14 people, 10 of whom were from the same family, were shot at the intersection of Polk and California. 3 were children. The victims had been holding a vigil for a relative who had recently passed away when a car drove by and opened fire. Damian Morris says there used to be a code of conduct that women and children were off limits.
Now when you're hearing about more children being involved or becoming victims of gun violence, and women as well, Monday's incident, we had about 8 women that were shot out of the 13. And so when you hear news like that, now people are questioning, like, there's no code of conduct anymore, like anybody can be a victim, and so that increases the fear.
Breakthrough was on hand Monday, as it often is when violence erupts. The group aims to have victims advocates on a scene within the half an hour of a shooting.
The more resources that you come into that incident with, the better it is for you to be able to calm down the situation and put some of the victims' mind at ease as well. Because right now they're in a crisis, they're panicking, right? They're thinking about surviving.
As head of Metropolitan Family Services Peace Initiative, Dominique McCord partners with Breakthrough. She says their therapists and clinicians work to be part of the community. And they also help to work residents get over any sort of negative stigma that is associated with therapy that could help them. Because she says for residents, the trauma is often compounded.
So when we think about things that are happening in East Garfield Park, our families don't often have time to heal before the next incident occurs. It was talked about earlier, and we all can see, like, when we look around us, we don't have green space. We're in a food desert. There's so many things, not just violence, that impact the day-to-day life of individuals who are in East Garfield Park.
A lot of the folks that we talked to did talk about that dearth of activity, businesses, restaurants, grocery stores even, opportunities, lack thereof in East Garfield Park. Cornelius Parks is a pastor at a Baptist church that is blocks down California from Monday's shooting.
And I do believe on this California street that it needs a makeover. Just last night, let's be honest, when we did the first press conference, it was dirty in the parking lot. But just because the mayor was coming last night, they made sure they provided trucks. They made sure they provided workers out there to clean it up for the mayor. Why we can't clean it up for the community? Why we can't clean it up for the people? Why we have to wait until dignitaries come around to make it look good? Let's make it look good for the people that live in this community.
The mayor was among those who last night held a vigil for the victims. Parks says he's grateful that nobody was killed. Still, he says, area families are scared. He says they were frightened before, too. A 2021 state law is designed to target funding to Illinois' communities that have the most violence, and that includes, per data, East Garfield Park. State officials say $65 million this year has been sent on trauma-informed care. But State Representative Lakeisha Collins, whose district includes East Garfield Park, says that is barely noticeable because black communities like this one have been oppressed for so long.
And so when you think about the lack of school funding, the lack of economic development, the blind eye to the violence that we're seeing in our community that's rooted in poverty, any type of funding, whether it's $65 million or more, you can barely see it. And yes, our kids, they don't have hope. Their parents are frightened. I know I'm frightened.
State Representative Camille Lilly says it is up to city, state, federal government even to help these families heal, to bring resources to victims' families. She says her brother was killed in Oak Park.
It is so alarming that not only did my brother get killed by a person, but I had to pay for his medical costs. So that burden stays on the family. We have to see the whole picture of what these incidents do to families and individuals.
Lilly says she knows and believes that officials want to help, but they don't know what to do. But she says that the status quo can't stand. And she says that residents do have ideas for turning those vacant lots into something. And she says those visions need to be executed. That, in turn, she says, gives residents more faith and belief in themselves and in their communities. Advocates say that East Garfield Park does have a lot going for it. It is close to public transportation with the Green Line nearby. It is also close and easy to get to downtown. And then, of course, there is the Garfield Park Conservatory, a world-renowned botanical park. So we'll be back with more, including interviewing the alderman who represents this area. For now, sending it back to you.
Amanda, thanks. We'll see you soon. Now to Paris Schuts and a city budget breakdown. Paris.
Brandon's Mayor Lori Lightfoot's 2023 spending plan is set for a final vote on Monday, but a dispute over how to step up efforts to combat climate change in Chicago could complicate the mayor's efforts to win approval. Hours of debate this week made it clear that Lightfoot's attempt to mollify some older people have fallen short. And that could leave the outcome of the final vote on the $16.4 billion budget plan in doubt. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with why the environment has become such a hot-button issue in this budget debate. Heather, and let's start with 2019. That's when candidate Lori Lightfoot promised to reestablish the Department of Environment, which was disbanded in 2012 by former Mayor Rahm Emanuel. So let's listen to Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, a frequent foe, blast the mayor for failing to keep those promises.
I find it insulting. I find it disrespectful to the people who voted for change that in this budget, after 4 years, the fourth budget that this mayor will now propose and pass, we have failed to get to a Department of the Environment. And the 10 positions in this office, that's less than the 15 in the mayor's press office. So if you want to talk about where our priorities lie as a city, I think it's pretty clear from this budget appropriation.
So this is the hill that progressive older people seem to be willing to die on right now. Why hasn't the mayor kept that campaign pledge to establish a Department of the Environment?
Well, all the way back in 2019, she took office and immediately was confronted with a massive budget deficit of $838 million. She simply said that the city could not afford it. Now, that mollified some people, and then COVID-19 took over and pushed every other issue to the back burner. But this issue is back front and center now.
And she offered some kind of middle ground to assuage some of those progressive older people?
That's right. So originally in this budget, the mayor proposed to create an Office of Climate and Environmental Equity. That would be under her authority in the mayor's office, and it would have 2 new positions. That wasn't acceptable, so she added 3 more positions and said it could be a standalone office, and she'd conduct a study to determine whether a full department was necessary and how it should be structured. Again, unacceptable according to progressive older people.
So the math here could be a problem for Mayor Lightfoot if she loses the entirety of the progressive caucus in City Council. That means she would need the support of more conservative members of the council. Let's listen to Alderman Marty Quinn's reaction to the fact that the budget doesn't increase funding for efforts to fill vacancies in the Chicago Police Department.
I can't sound the alarm loud enough that we are losing officers every single day. So it's great to do a victory lap around recruiting, but if we're recruiting and not retaining, it's all for naught. So this blind spot will continue if we don't incentivize.
So she's got a problem spot with her more left flank, with the more centrist flank, another problem spot here. That doesn't sound like someone ready to vote for her budget.
It sure does not. And he is likely to be part of, like you said, a conservative bloc determined to sort of insist upon more money for the police department. So she's not going to find those votes there because she doesn't have millions of dollars more to spend. So that will mean that there will be an onus on her to make an agreement with the progressives like she did last year, which entailed millions of dollars more in spending on affordable housing and mental health care. Those proposals aren't on the table this year.
Seems like all different factions flexing their muscle here on this budget, Heather. So what happens if Lightfoot can't round up the 26 votes it takes to pass anything in City Council?
Well, it's going to be a long weekend for the mayor and her allies, and if she doesn't have the votes on Monday, they won't vote. The city has until December 31st to pass a budget for 2023, so there's a little bit of time, but not much.
All right, so a lot of arm twisting and lobbying going to be happening between now and then. And oh, wait, we have a midterm election as well. A lot going on. Heather Sharon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read more of Heather's coverage on the mayor's budget proposal on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now to Brandis with details on a once mighty river now at near record lows. Brandis.
Paris, one of the nation's most vital waterways, is facing a drought. The mighty Mississippi River's water levels are low, so much so that old shipwrecks have been revealed on parts of the river. Joining us to talk about what's driving the drought and its impact are Adams County Farm Bureau President Brent Clare and Jonathan Remo, Associate Professor with the School of Earth Systems and Sustainability at Southern Illinois University. Thanks to you both for joining us. Jonathan Remo, let's start with you, please. Just how low are water levels?
Well, from the southern tip of Illinois down to about midway through Arkansas, they were at record water level lows. However, how hydrologists measure flood by the river's flow, we're at low conditions, but we're not at all-time record lows like we saw during the Dust Bowl in the 1930s.
Brent, when was the last time it was this bad? 1988-ish?
1988, the great drought we had back then pushed levels to lower levels for them, almost to where they are now.
So, Jonathan, here's a map monitoring droughts in the U.S. We're going to show you the red being the most extreme drought, yellow being abnormally dry. How are the current droughts contributing to water levels?
Well, that's the big issue. It hasn't been raining since about midway through the spring here in the central portion of the United States. And so you can see a big spot here in the central portion. But pretty much from the west of the Appalachians all the way out to the west coast, the whole country is in drought. So we have about 80% of the country is in drought, and we need rain.
Yeah, and we're looking at that map right now, and you can see some of the red that we mentioned earlier, where the drought is at its worst, yellow, where it is abnormally dry. Most of the country is facing this, as you said. Brent Clare, what is the importance of the Mississippi River for farming and trades?
The Mississippi River is the lifeline for agriculture, but it's not just agriculture, it's the commodities that come up the river as well. But specifically for us, if we cannot get our grain to the Gulf of Mexico, where it gets put onto the larger ships, we can't market our grain to the global market. There's demand in the United States, but our main market is across the globe. And fortunately, some reports have been saying that the river has been closed down. That's not necessarily true. For most part, the river has stayed open, and in the past 4 days, it actually has been wide open. They just cannot haul as much up and down the river.
Tell me a little bit more about that as far as the barges, because of the water levels not being able to haul as much up and down the river.
Well, the upper Mississippi River Basin is pretty much from Cairo all the way to Minnesota. And that portion, the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for maintaining a minimum of a 9-foot depth throughout that entire stretch of land. That way, barges will get through no matter what. And so far, they have not had any problem in maintaining that. But on the other hand, barges are typically loaded more than 9 foot, maybe 10, 11 foot heavy. They've had to reduce their loads in order to make sure they maintain a minimum depth as well. So maybe a 65,000 bushel tug may only hold 50,000 now. And again, every bushel counts when the price of fuel and everything else is going up, trying to get as much you can down the river in one trip as possible.
And Brent, how's all of that affected the supply chain?
So far, we are able to get our grain down the river It's like I said earlier, it's not closed down too much. And there are buyers for the grain, even though the price of freight is so outrageously high, almost 2 times as normal. The buyers down the Gulf will buy for that premium just to make sure they can sustain demand. But on the other flip side of that, we need the product to come from the Gulf up to us. The fertilizer that we use, and then fuel, anywhere from the Chicago down to the Illinois River, the fuel and salt that is used so neatly in your state or your city, we have to ship that upstream as well. So again, it's a two-way street. It's not just sending everything down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's getting those products up into the middle of the country.
Jonathan, what's the ecological impact of these droughts on the river?
On the river, yeah, it's low water. We're not seeing abnormally low water. It will impact the ecology and the vegetation as one would imagine during a drought. But most of the ecosystem can withstand a drought of this magnitude. But if it continues into multiple years, we could see some substantial ecological damage.
And Jonathan, again, sticking with you, how does climate change factor into these conditions?
Right. So, it's hard to say one drought is attributed to climate change, but what we see from the science literature and our models, we expect to see more of this variability from flood to drought, happening more rapidly. So we can expect more droughts probably like this going into the future.
And as you're speaking, we're looking at video of a ship that I believe has been revealed by the water level falling. Illinois and the surrounding regions, though, Jonathan, they saw some intense rains and flooding this past summer. Why this jump in extremes?
Right. What the models have shown us and other science research has shown us is that the variability is going to increase as the climate gets warmer. So we'll see these freak floods where we'll have, pretty much a drought, and they'll get 9 inches of rain in like St. Louis or elsewhere throughout the state. And then we won't see any rain at all. So the warmer air is holding more moisture so we can get more intense rain events. And then, we have these dichotomies between wet and dry, which we're not used to. We're used to the wet periods and dry periods. So we can expect more of this in the future, I would assume.
And Brent, if this continues, could this become a financial burden for you or for other farmers?
Well, one thing farmers are good at is adapting to change. We've gone from what Jonathan has mentioned about, going from floods to droughts in 1 year. And fortunately, technology and everything else is helping us to adapt to that. We will find a way. We always do. That means having to move our grain through trains. It's not the most desirable, but it's a possible way. But again, we're not too concerned about that because we know, at least in the upper Mississippi River Valley, that should be taken care of by the Corps of Engineers, at least get us down to Cairo. Maybe we can get some stuff past that point. But again, we'll adapt. We'll find a ways, and we'll always make a way after it, no matter what Mother Nature deals us.
And meanwhile, Jonathan, what is Mother Nature going to deal them? Is there any relief in sight?
In the near term, the rivers will come up a little bit, which will help out navigation. But we typically see low water on the Mississippi January, February, and then we get into this spring melt, and the water will come up. But if it stays below average rainfall like we've seen, we may be back the same place here come July again.
Okay. And gentlemen, as someone who... Thank you for joining. I have to say, as someone who grew up a mile from the Vicksburg bluff of the Mississippi River, to see it today, it is shockingly low. And of course, obviously, we'll have to wait and see, like you said, what Mother Nature deals us. Brent Clare and Jonathan Remo, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, evolving views of gender and romance are highlighted in a new show. We take you inside that exhibit, but first, a look at the weather.
Culture is vibrant, it's rich, it's fun.
We try to focus on, hey, let me help you. This is what Chicago is. This is Little Village.
There's much more ahead on the program, including more from East Garfield Park as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. But first, romance, gender, and sexuality are newly framed in an art show at a Chicago exhibition space. It's called The First Homosexuals, and it's about a time when the art world released a flood of new representations of same-sex desire. Producer Mark Vitale has the story, and fair warning, there's some provocative content and nudity.
There are soloists, duets, and ensembles, myths and legends, and more earthbound delights. They are historical artworks from the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
You're going to see work that looks a lot like our contemporary version of queerness, which is to say that it includes what we would in the old days call gay and lesbian art, but it also includes a whole range of work that plays with gender, that includes transness. And in fact, we're showing one of the very earliest works of trans art ever. And so what we're seeing is actually something that I think a lot of people are a bit surprised by, which is that we didn't invent the idea of queerness. It's not a contemporary idea.
The show is called The First Homosexuals, Global Depictions of a New Identity. And the art presented here begins in 1869 for a reason.
Because in 1869, the word homosexual was actually coined, and it was the first term to essentialize an identity, to make a person who was inclined to same-sex acts have a deep interior core that was distinctly different from heterosexuals. Up until that point, homo and heterosexuality existed along a continuum. They were both forms of sexuality, and they were understood as functionally the same. One was, of course, prohibited, one was celebrated, but they were all forms of sexuality. With the creation of the homosexual, all of a sudden sexuality took a binary cast. As the language of sexuality became increasingly truncated and delimiting, art took up the slack. Art started to be the place where all forms of sexual difference that language could no longer actually name, couldn't speak to, emerged.
There are dual portraits from artists who were lovers, and coded imagery that suggests more than meets the eye, including a painting of the celebrated actress Sarah Bernhardt by her partner, French artist Louise Abema.
What Abema does in the image is include two black swans in a kind of coded way, suggesting the intimacy and the difference of their partnership from the norm.
Salutat is an unexpected painting of a boxer by the great American painter Thomas Eakins.
In 1898, when this picture was made, homosexual in the United States was not in wide use. It was a medical term, a legal term, but it was not in wide use. This is the queerest kind of boxing picture, in that the point of a boxing picture was to show blood and sweat and masculine aggression. None of that is in evidence here. One of the things that I've been trying to do in all my exhibitions is to underscore that the idea of gay and lesbian as a binary construct is of a historically delimited nature. And before it, and now after it, sexuality is sexuality, and it isn't so easily binarized.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The exhibition is at Wrightwood 659 in Lincoln Park, and it's there through December 17th. You can find more out on our website. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a local nonprofit offers youth a safe place in East Garfield Park amid increased gun violence. We're one-on-one with one of its directors.
There's a lot of things that we want to do, there are plans to do that we really wouldn't be able to do without additional resources.
Cook County Forest Preserves asked voters for a tax hike. Should daylight saving time become the new norm? Proposed legislation says yes, but many health experts advise against it. Plus, how a new exhibit at the Driehaus Museum is honoring the legacy of an architect, preservationist, and photographer. But first, some more of today's top stories. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will both be campaigning in the Chicago area ahead of Tuesday's midterm elections. The president will be in the Chicago area tomorrow and is expected to lead voter turnout efforts for incumbent House Democrats Lauren Underwood, Bill Foster, and Sean Casten in apparently tightening races in Chicago's suburbs. Meanwhile, in a statement, Illinois Democrats say Vice President Kamala Harris will be campaigning in Chicago on Sunday. Chicago-based Mondelez, maker of Oreo cookies, is temporarily suspending advertising on Twitter. The Wall Street Journal reports Mondelez is among a growing number of companies hitting the pause button on Twitter ads in the wake of Elon Musk's takeover of the social media platform. A number of major advertisers are said to be concerned that Musk's apparent desire to scale back content moderation on Twitter could place their ads next to potentially offensive content. Mondelez reportedly spent almost $15 million advertising on the platform in the third quarter of this year. A new exhibition at the Museum of Science and Industry to celebrate a childhood classic, Mold-A-Rama. It may not be cutting-edge science, but the Mold-A-Rama machines that pump out plastic figurines of everything from dinosaurs to busts of Abraham Lincoln have long been a favorite of visitors to MSI. Now, a new exhibit celebrates and tells the story of the beloved retro machines that first debuted at the 1962 World's Fair in Seattle. The exhibit runs through the fall of 2023. Get your tickets now. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
I'll have to run and get my Mold-A-Rama dinosaurs and whatnot. Thanks, Brandis. And now we return to East Garfield Park, where Amanda Vinicky spent the day as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, the local alderman Jason Irvin of the 28th Ward, also Garfield Park resident, not president, I don't think they have one of those, was kind enough to join us. And so thank you very much for starters. And of course, this community reeling from Monday's tragedy. Do you have any updates that you can share?
One thing that I can tell you, the police have been working extremely hard. They have some strong leads in this particular case, and we're hopeful that they will be bringing someone to justice in short order.
Someone or someones?
I don't know someones or ones or twos or threes or fours, but someone needs to be held accountable for what occurred on Halloween night here in this community.
And I do believe there is a reward.
There's a $15,000 reward through CPD tips. So if anyone has any information that they wish to share, there is reward available. If you will share that information, we need that information. Those young people, women, children deserve justice. And if you're holding the key to solving that puzzle, we would appreciate you to get involved with this.
We hear a lot about residents that are sometimes afraid of coming forward, lack of protection, or that they might be retaliated against. What do you have to say to folks who might know something but aren't feeling comfortable coming forward?
Well, last night I had a conversation with the mayor. I also had a chance to speak with the governor. You will be protected. If you have information that will lead to the arrest or in the conviction of these individuals, you will be protected. We cannot have a situation where people won't step forward because of that. And this is a very point where we're looking to bring resources to those who are in those predicaments. So again, we need everyone to step up and do their part.
And Alderman, 14 individuals shot. Thankfully, as far as we know, nobody has died from that, but also another individual hit by a car as apparently she tried to run away from the scene. Clearly, Garfield Park has many gems. We're standing by a couple right now, but what can be done about the violence that does have this community on the top of the most violent in all of Illinois?
Well, what we can do, number one, we must band together. That's point number one. Point number two is we must have the necessary resources that other communities have. There was a difference in what the response was in Highland Park versus the response in Garfield Park. And in a state like this, in a country like this, that should not be. So communities that are properly resourced and cared for, we don't have these same challenges.
Whose response? Is that from the public, government?
It's from all of us. You know, it's all of us. We all play a role in safety. We can't just lay safety at someone else's feet. All of us have to be accountable for helping to create a safe environment in our respective communities.
Well, of course, the city budget vote is coming up right now, projected for Tuesday. You have been a steadfast ally of Mayor Lori Lightfoot. What money is in there, or will you demand be in there, for things like East Garfield Park and public safety?
Well, there are plenty of items in the budget for not only East and West Garfield Park and also for public safety. This building that we're standing behind right here, the Gold Dome, in this park, we put almost $22 million into this park in the last 2 years. Paths in this park had not been touched in probably 30 years. They've been repaved. Streets in this park hadn't been done. Curbs in this park hadn't been done. Lights in this park hadn't been done. But with Mayor Lightfoot and myself, we were able to accomplish that and restore this gym to where it is. This is a beautiful building. You see, we call it the Gold Dome. That's why it's a gym.
It definitely is beautiful. And then finally, don't want to let you leave without talking a beat on the mayor's race, particularly that we might see another big name candidate with Congressman Chuy Garcia getting in that race. What would that do? Might that exacerbate further tensions between the Black and Latino communities?
You know what? It may. It's hopeful that everything is kept at a civil tone. But what I can tell you is that going through a couple of processes, I think it may be very difficult to do that. Again, we have no qualms against anyone, wanting to deal with their political empowerment. But again, things shouldn't be done at the expense of others. And teaming up with others to, demoralize someone else is just not good politics. It's just not good business. And again, those differences and what happens out here in the streets carry out.
Thank you so very much for having us in your community. That, again, is Alderman Jason Irvin of the 28th Ward. And as the alderman said, he believes that CPD are close to apprehending someone in connection with that drive-by shooting that wounded 14 individuals on Monday. Back to you.
Certainly something the victims and their families want to hear right now. And Amanda will check in with you in just a bit. And now to Brandis for a look at the push to make daylight saving time permanent. Brandis.
And Paris, thank you. What's that saying? Spring forward, fall back. It's how many of us remember which way to change our clocks when the time comes. And that time is coming this weekend with the end of daylight saving time. The twice-yearly clock switching might come to an end for good if Congress passes the Sunshine Protection Act, making daylight saving time permanent in 2023. But there's plenty of disagreement over whether that's beneficial to health, safety, and energy costs. Joining us with more is Dr. Sabra Abbott, Associate Professor of Neurology in Sleep Medicine at Northwestern University's School of Medicine. Dr. Abbott, thanks for joining us. First, if you would, remind us the difference between daylight saving time and standard time.
Yeah, so what we're in currently is daylight saving time, and we're going to be switching to standard time over this weekend. Basically, what that's going to mean for most of us is that we delay or push the clocks back by an hour. And that better aligns us with the time that the sun is rising and setting.
So what is the impact of this time shift on our bodies?
Well, this time of year is actually the easy one for us. We naturally tend to move a little bit later. It also gives us an extra hour to potentially catch up on sleep over the weekend. But we are potentially going to find that for a couple of days next week, you might be feeling sleepy a little bit earlier at night, and you might wake up a little bit before your alarm those first couple of days.
And what is the impact, long term of sort of living in daylight saving time versus daylight standard time?
Yeah, it's a little hard to know exactly what that impact is going to be, but we can kind of approximate from what it would be like to live in sort of one relationship of time with the sun versus another. When we think about daylight saving time versus standard time, basically all we're doing is just shifting that arbitrary clock on the wall. The sun rises and sets at the same time, and our body tends to follow what the sun does. So when we are in daylight saving time, basically we think of it as kind of a misalignment between what the sun is doing and what our bodies want to do and the clock on the wall. And so what happens if we stay in daylight saving time year round, basically we end up waking up when the sun is still down, when it's still dark out. And then it's light a little bit later in the evening, although the days are still pretty short. And that also means that we get a little bit more light at night. It makes it harder for us to fall asleep and harder for us to wake up in the morning. That also...
Please go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say that also can translate into other negative health impacts. And so we think that this could also result in increased rates of depression and increased rates of cancer. And some of that data comes from comparing people who live in the eastern side of a time zone versus the western side. And that sort of approximates that mismatch between the sun and your internal body clock. And those people who live in the western edge of the time zone do tend to have those higher rates of depression and cancer.
So advocates, though, they say that making daylight savings time permanent, as the Sunshine Protection Act would do, that it can have positive impacts. Fewer car accidents, kids and adults can enjoy more outdoor time, energy savings. What is your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think the data is a little mixed on that. I think, first of all, the name is a little misleading to call it the Sunshine Protection Act. No matter what we do with daylight saving time or standard time, the days still get shorter in the winter. And so we're not going to gain any more hours of sunshine. What we do know is that, for example, if we stayed on permanent daylight saving time, it does mean that for places like Chicago, the sun isn't going to rise until 8 or 9 in the morning in the winter. Previously, when the country has tried things like this, there actually were increases in school bus fatalities. So kids waiting for the bus early in the morning when it was still dark out ended up getting into accidents in that way. And so we don't necessarily think it's helpful from that respect. And the energy savings a little debatable as well, because you're going to have to heat the house more in the winter in the morning, and you may need to use your air conditioning more in the evening in the summer.
What would the impact on kids be from something like that, from extending daylight saving time, making it permanent, you know, from younger ones who are still napping to teenagers who start their days typically very early and have extracurricular activities well into the evening oftentimes?
Yeah, so I think the teenagers are actually the ones that we're going to see the biggest impact on. So we already know that as you go into adolescence, you tend to get a little bit later. You become more of a night owl. And if we are in an environment where the sun is rising much later, it's going to be even harder for those teenagers to get up in the morning. We've already made a lot of efforts to try to delay school start times. And if we stayed on permanent daylight saving time, that would make things even harder for our teenagers.
All of that said, the time change is still happening this weekend and again in the spring, unless something changes in Washington, D.C. How can we prepare for this upcoming time shift?
Yeah, so like I said, the time change this weekend is probably going to be the easier one for us to adapt to. A little bit of extra light in the evening is going to help you push your clock a little bit later. If you want to start making those changes a couple days in advance, you may find it even easier to shift. But most of us by Tuesday probably should not really feel much difference.
Of course, and that's all until March when things get a little bit harder. We lose that hour again.
Yep.
Okay. Dr. Sabre Abbott, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Brandis, it's rare when newspaper editorial boards and fiscal watchdog groups recommend that residents vote to increase their property taxes. But that's exactly the case as Cook County voters face a binding question on their election ballot. Do you want to pay a little bit more to help fund the Cook County Forest Preserves? Outside groups have waged a public campaign to convince voters to say yes because they believe the investment will pay growing dividends.
The 3,500-acre Bussey Woods Forest Preserve is known for its trails, lagoons, and ancient forests. But a cluster of invasive buckthorn threatens the area's ecology.
It's a weed that chokes out all the native plants, it doesn't allow sunlight to get to the floor of the forest.
Cook County Forest Preserve District Superintendent Arnold Randall wants to remove the plant and restore the forest, like it did on the other side of this trail.
So you can see this is much clearer. You can actually see into the forest. You're not looking into a thicket of green.
But he says the forest preserves need more money for this and nearly 20,000 acres that are in line for a clearing.
There's a lot of things that we want to do, there are plans to do that we really wouldn't be able to do without additional resources.
The forest preserves are a quasi-separate unit of Cook County government that manages 70,000 acres of public land, along with the Brookfield Zoo and Chicago Botanic Garden. It does not have its own taxing authority and must go directly to voters instead. For the first time in nearly a century, Cook County commissioners voted to put a binding referendum on November's ballot. It asked voters in a roundabout way whether they would support hiking the Forest Preserve levy a fraction of a percent to bring in $40 million in new annual revenue.
Proponents say that amounts to about $20 annually on a house worth $300,000.
As a born and raised Illinoisan, I get it. I know what's cool and what's the Packers. I also know how important the forest preserves are to Cook County, and I know that we get to enjoy them because they were preserved for us.
Illinois-born actor Nick Offerman cut an ad for an independent expenditure group called Vote Yes for Clean Air, Clean Water, and Wildlife, aimed at getting the public on board.
And it just frankly, if you compare it to other conservation districts in the state and other forest preserves in the state, it's underfunded and understaffed per acre pretty dramatically.
The campaign touts the forest preserve's role in absorbing floodwater and improving air quality. It has won the endorsement of the Chicago Tribune editorial board and the Civic Federation, which is a nonpartisan fiscal watchdog group. Civic Federation President Lawrence Massaul, no fan of higher taxes, says this hike makes sense.
There's a plan. This money isn't going to be just thrown into the system.
Massaul says $10 million of the $40 million is earmarked to shore up the district's pension system, which at nearly 60% funding makes it one of the healthiest of all the local government pensions. He says the district under board president Tony Preckwinkle and Superintendent Randall has cleaned up its act.
Both in terms of their financial management, in terms of their operations, and what they've been able to do to bring camping and other activities. And we really saw during COVID how much the forest preserves were a benefit for people who could get out and use them.
The remaining $30 million is pegged for restoration, conservation programs, and the acquisition of thousands of new acres, so Cook County residents can escape to nature outside their front door for decades to come.
Obviously, if you go out west to the national parks, that's different, but here in an urbanized area, to have this so accessible is what makes it unique and different and special.
And Randall says the forest preserves make up about 11% of all the land in Cook County, making it the largest urban preserve of its kind in the country. And now we go back to East Garfield Park, where Amanda Vinicky spent all day as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Yes, Paris, and earlier today we visited Marillac St. Vincent Family Services. It aims to be a safe place for people of all ages to learn, to grow skills. They do have programs for pregnant people through the elderly and also children. And with that, we spoke with Albert Richardson. He's been with Marillac St. Vincent since 1996 and is currently the Director of Youth Services. I began by asking him about the objective, and here's his enthusiastic response.
Families are struggling even now all across the board, but we want to make sure, in addition to have these services for them, there's peace of mind. Not just that you know where your child is, but you're not worrying about the fee and tuitions. So we make sure those services are provided so parents can go to work or go to school and know that their children are safe and being cared for.
And all right, all these activities, there's a lot going on. So obviously you have children that have come from a long day of school, maybe some quizzes, a math test. Eek. What's different about being in those school classrooms and then you come to an after-school program like this?
So many of our schools now, I love it, they look at them, they call them scholars, and so you're looking at being professional students, but when you come in here, you're reminding you're still a kid. You can act like a kid, you can play like a kid, and through play you're learning. You're still learning, but you have dramatic play, you have arts and crafts, you have games, but more importantly, you're building that rapport with your teacher, and someone, that's someone that you can trust and you can go to when you're having a bad day outside of your mom or dad that you can talk to and get you through it.
And you still are in touch with some of the students that took part in these programs when, I don't know, 15 some years ago. They are still involved with Marillac St. Vincent.
They are still involved. They have children here. A lot of them have their children are here now, or they have some type of relative that's going through the program. But even just through a phone call or through social media, or they'll stop by and remind you how old you are a little bit, and that's okay. But just so proud to see the things that they're doing today.
And we're here to focus on the community of East Garfield Park. Why does, part of this is historical, it dates back 108 years, I've learned. But why is it important to have all of these services, that full gamut, in this neighborhood?
With everything that's going on in this world today, a lot of our kids are being forced to grow up too fast. A lot of them are almost head of the households, if you understand what that means. They're running the household. There's just not a lot of attention on them when they go home. They have to be taking care of the little ones and everything that's going on. So we want to remind them. A lot of pressure on you. It's a lot of pressure on them. So we want to remind them, when you're here, you're children. You can be that and build a relationship with your friends. You can do some of the things that you dream about doing. And our job is to just walk them through that process and make sure that they have fun doing it.
And did you talk at all with teachers, those who are leading these classrooms, about what happened here? We're here in part, there was unfortunately a mass shooting. Is that something that students have asked about, that you address with leaders?
I'll say this, as leaders, we actually had a phone call. We kind of talked as a group, as a staff, about it when it happened. The first thing that goes up the antennas is someone we know. You always get worried if it's a youth or a teen or even a parent.
The fear, the pit.
It's that pit in your stomach. You know, we're all calling, did you hear anything? So sometimes no news is good news. But on the scary part of this, a lot of the kids don't ask questions about it. That's nerve-wracking because they begin to normalize it. A lot of the youth in this area, they see it day in and day out, so it becomes normal to them. But for the ones, we do look out for those who are traumatized by it, if they lost a friend or just you're ducking in your house now because you don't know if a bullet is going to come through the window. And we're actually training kids for that now in schools, of how to be able to keep safe, or if we're outside, when to drop down and go down. So it's including here at programs. Including here, we do that here as much as we can, and you do have that conversations. We don't want to push that into it because it could, re-traumatize some of the children. But if they need to talk about it, we're there for them as their teachers, as the staff. But we also have services here to assist us with that.
Again, that was Albert Richardson, who's been helping area youth as part of Marillac St. Vincent, which has been in the community for 108 years, trying to boost families in need. They've got some amazing programs coming up, particularly for the holidays as well.
Certainly a great community staple there, Amanda. Before we let you go, you're just down the street from another community staple, a city staple, really, the Garfield Park Conservatory. I hear there's an event tonight. What can you share with us about it?
There's a fundraiser, and even if you're not there, you might be able to still, as soon as Chicago Tonight is over anyway, catch some of this online. It's called Floratica, and local fashion designers and floral designers make outfits out of all flowers, plants, flora, fauna, and then it's sort of a going down the runway with all of that. So again, a fundraiser for the conservatory that really fits with its mission.
Floratica sounds very intriguing, Amanda. I know you'll skip over there as soon as you're done with Chicago Tonight this evening. Thanks very much.
Better believe it. Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it right back to you.
Sounds like a cool event, Paris. Thank you. A Tale of Two Stories is taking center stage at the Richard H. Driehaus Museum as it explores the work of architect Louis Sullivan and a photographer on a literal life's mission to capture Sullivan's impact. Arts correspondent Angel Ito recently introduced us to Capturing Louis Sullivan, what Richard Nichols saw. Here's another look.
We're moving both narratives forward throughout the whole exhibition, and it's sort of like an opera, I felt, because the music goes forward and then the drama. So we have two stories we're trying to tell.
It's a story of architect Louis Sullivan and photographer Richard Nichols, two artists connected through their work, but never in life. Born just 4 years after Sullivan's death, Richard Nichols committed his life's work to documenting Sullivan's architecture as both a photographer and preservationist. It was a decision he made when learning of Louis Sullivan's work while as a student at the IIT Institute of Design.
Richard Nichols was trying to record the buildings, one through taking photographs of them, and then second by salvaging architectural ornament, because the ornament was very important to Sullivan's idea of adding beauty and aesthetic dimension to his houses. So the exhibition is not only the photographs that Richard Nichols took, but also the artifacts that he salvaged.
Chicago buildings being created by Sullivan and his partner Dankmar Adler were being destroyed in the 1960s and 70s. A preservationist, Richard Nichols saw it his duty to document everything from behind the lens.
We're trying to tell a story about Richard Nichols' photography. For example, the auditorium photograph over there, Richard has climbed up high on the building across from the auditorium to get this magnificent view. He had no fear of heights. He was a paratrooper, because during the Korean War, and he just jumped up top of buildings to get these great shots. He was a documentary photographer, and he told it as it was. So warts and all, he showed the building in a documentary fashion, not to make them the most beautiful buildings, though of course the photographs are beautiful, but to really document, to show the buildings. His goal was to publish a book, and he was gathering the photographs and of course the information, the documentation on the buildings. And he discovered buildings that were unknown by Adler and Sullivan, so he was doing research.
Nichols' research in the exhibition has been broken up into 4 themes, 2 on Sullivan's residential and commercial buildings, and the other 2 on the Chicago Stock Exchange building. That building is also the location of Richard Nichols' death. He died in 1972 while attempting to salvage pieces of the building when it collapsed on him. And while his commitment to preservation ended there, his life's mission lives on in more ways than one.
After Richard Nichols died, John Vinci created the Richard Nichols Committee, which had his archives, all of his negatives, all of the documentation. Maybe a decade later, they gave this to the Chicago Art Institute, and it's now in the Ryerson and Burnham Library at the Art Institute. So now there's a whole other generation who need to hear the story again about how Richard Nichols really gave his life to save buildings, and that was a mission that can inspire us for today.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Capturing Louis Sullivan, What Richard Nichols Saw, runs through February 19th. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.